Dave, why was the Oregon Wine Board created?
Really, it was to bring the growers and wineries together and to create a more professional face for our industry in its ability to talk to the world.
Well, Oregon is really quite unique in the fact that all of the winemakers really have been partners. They've all been peers in this endeavor.
In the wine board endeavor, you mean?
Or in the winemaking business in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important part of what we in Oregon needed to do from the very beginning, which was we could not have a strong enough voice individually, either in the marketplace or with our legislature or in talking to the media, but by banding together and working together, selling wines together, tasting wines together, coming up with strategies together, we were able to have far more impact in all those areas.
Can you talk about Oregon's idealism and quest for purity? In a sense, those are two different things, but they're also related. It's always been, for people making wine in Oregon, more than just growing grapes and making wine and selling it. It's been about convincing others of the rightness of doing this and telling them why we do this. And you'll see when we're selling wine that we're talking about that more than just about the grapes and about the wine. Well, why do you do this?
And that speaks to your point of idealism. We do this because Oregon needed to do this, in a sense. There was something about this place which had not been fulfilled with logging and tourism and general agriculture that drew a number of people into this industry, now 1,000 plus, to do something that was in some sense a higher calling, certainly one which had more romance and more feelings of goodness, if you will, about it than a lot of other kinds of agriculture. One that raised the flag for Oregon agriculture in a way that growing wheat or raising cattle or even growing filberts couldn't do. That said to the rest of the country and perhaps the rest of the world that agriculture in Oregon was actually very special.
Well, if it's so spiritual, are you not concerned? Does that mean you're not concerned about the bottom line?
Well, some people have accused me of that, yeah, including my partners from time to time. But I think part of the maturity of the industry is figuring out how to translate the idealism or to continue to keep the idealism of this business alive, even as we have to make money, even as we have to get the cost of an acre of grape growing down to $6,000 or $6,500 an acre or whatever it may be, even as we have to keep the amount of French oak that we buy every year for our Pinot in some sort of balance, even as we would wish, and this is my particular problem, even though I wish I could redesign our labels every year. The point is that ultimately we need to figure out what the priorities of our idealism are. And fundamentally, I think they, for me at least, are in vineyards in the right places with the right varieties and the opportunity to work with the entire industry to have more than 2 + 2.
Well, what are some of the challenges you see coming up?
I think the biggest challenge for the industry remains selling wine. It isn't everybody's second nature. And ultimately, by working with others in the industry, I can help a little bit in their sales, but ultimately it's up to each and every individual winery to sell their wines, and ultimately to each grape grower to sell their grapes. The biggest problem is always making sure that the supply is in some sort of balance to the demand, or the demand that we can create. And it's not unlike the rest of farming in that nothing is ever right about that. There's either too much or too little at all times. So I think that's the biggest challenge. There are big challenges, and there are broad industry-wide challenges, and there are personal challenges. I mean, our personal challenge at this winery is following up on our ideal of making red wines that are incredibly rich and almost sweet in their fruitiness without them falling off the edge and not being able to age. One of the best examples of idealism, yes, I would say that there's been in Oregon a series of things that we've done that have coupled sort of this need to tell the rest of the world about what we're doing with our idealism. Among the others were the labeling regulations that we got passed in 1977 after working 4 years with the industry to figure out what we wanted. We were one of the early regions to have AVAs, the Willamette, the Rogue, the Willamette and the Umpqua early on, the Rogue and the Columbia Valley later. We created, and others can talk to this better than I, but a conference to figure out how to make Pinot Noir in the New World that's become a model for such conferences with other varieties in other places, called the Steamboat Conference. We created an international Pinot Noir celebration rather than yet another competition, something to celebrate this grape variety, which has been wildly successful and widely duplicated in other regions. And most recently, we created Oregon Pinot Camp, which was a whole bunch of wineries working together to figure out a way to address our most important customers, the people who sell our wines in restaurants and retail stores. Along the way, there have been a series of regulations and a series of interactions with government that have expressed that idealism, but ultimately it's been that melding of idealism, the need to talk about what we're doing, and this melding those two things with the selling of wine, or at least the marketing of wine.
Can we talk about the growing of wine a little bit? Are you ready to move on? Can you talk about, can you explain the history of clonal research, when you use them, why they're important?
Yeah. In the mid-70s, in the early 70s rather, 1973 to be exact, if you planted a vineyard, you ordered plants, you ordered Pinot Noir. That was it. We really didn't know that there were clones of Pinot Noir, different types of Pinot Noir. Chuck Curry, one of the early people to plant a vineyard in Oregon, told us about that in 1973, kind of grew out of his experiences of working in Alsace. And on a trip that I took the following year in '74, I made it a point to go to a couple of different research stations in France, in Burgundy, in southern France, to try to find out about the state of clonal research, or clonal selection, if you will, in France, and ended up helping set up a program at Oregon State that would allow some of the new clones that had been selected in France to be brought into Oregon, paving the way for the importation of the Dijon clones in 1984 and 88, and pretty much a revolution in in the kinds of material that we plant, not just with Pinot Noir, but with other varieties as well. And along the way, introduced a whole bunch of other varieties that hadn't existed in Oregon.
How has that improved the quality of Oregon Pinot Noir?
One of the most important things about Pinot is that it's on the one hand extremely expressive of the place where it's grown, perhaps the variety that is the most expressive. And you get that huge variation there, and you can couple that, if you choose, with huge variation of clones. Clones are the subdivision of a variety like Pinot Noir. In 1973, when we were planting grapes, we planted Pinot Noir. There weren't any clones. It took a trip to France and a bunch of research and an import program at Oregon State University for us to get to the point where we are today, that instead of planting Pinot, we plant one of somewhere between 15 and 20 different clones of Pinot, knowing certain attributes that they're going to give us, and usually planting a whole range of them, because what we want is complexity in the wines.
What are the innovative innovations that you've seen in your industry?
Okay. I think the unique thing that Oregon brought to Pinot Noir winemaking, or to winemaking generally, was this system that we set up of working together out of necessity, which we then shared with virtually the entire world. Our steamboat conference, our celebrations, in which we shared how we make Pinot and what we were trying to do as we made Pinot. And most recently, what our goals were as we set out to make Pinot. In a sense, it's not an enological innovation, it's a system of communication. What Oregon has done in terms of winemaking has been largely to adopt and then adapt the winemaking that we have seen mostly with Pinot, but with other varieties as well. Gentle handling is a mantra that is repeated in every winery. How temperatures during fermentation are controlled or manipulated, if you will, to make the style of wine that you want. But ultimately, the place that we've gotten to, and the step that was the most important in Oregon, was to move from the sort of naive winemaking that we started with in '78 when we started out, where whatever happened was right because it was what was happening, to a place where we say, well, we want our wines to taste like this, and the way we get there is by doing this during fermentation, and by using this regime of oak, and by doing this as we finish the wine. Hey, and by the way, and picking grapes at this particular time.
Okay, stop. Speak. What were the three viticultural innovations that Oregon contributed?
There's one really obvious viticultural contribution from Oregon, and that's the Scott Henry trellis that Scott Henry created. The other two things, though, that have had a major impact on at least American viticulture are our clonal importation program that brought in huge arrays of clones of varieties, a whole range of varieties as well. And then our early adoption of vertical shoot positioning, that is where the shoots go right up rather than hanging over and shading the fruit, which has kind of shown the rest of the New World how important that is. AVAs, American Viticultural Areas in Oregon, have had the tendency, at least initially, to bring people together in the industry. it's taken, often, particularly in this recent set of new AVAs, it's taken a lot of work with a lot of people pulling together to figure out ways to define specific viticultural places, where grapes are grown. But there's an unintended consequence, I fear, of these AVAs, and I think it's shown in when we first did the Willamette Valley AVA in the early 80s. It was an attempt to make it possible to estate bottle wine, but it had the tendency to divide the growers in the Willamette Valley from the growers and wineries in the other parts of the state. The big challenge that faces us with these 6 new AVAs is, can we continue to focus our efforts on selling the entire Willamette Valley and even Oregon, even as we try to market our individual hillside? When this industry was really founded in the late 60s and 70s, it coincided with this amazing opportunity, this opening in time that existed when people were no longer expected to do what they'd been trained to do or what their families had done, where in fact you were kind of, yes, you were urged to go back to the land, to become a hippie, to do things that you never thought about doing before. And we were lucky enough to fall into that opening and to, with virtually no money, be able to buy land, build a house, start planting grapes, make wine, even sell wine. Incredibly naive as we look back at it, but I think it's what was the reason for much of this idealism. And over the years, I think knowing that we came from that has allowed us to survive the ups and downs and the need for reinvention to become a 21st century winery rather than a hippie winery, if you will.
Well, you said you've had to reinvent yourself several times. Can you give us an example of then versus now?
Yeah, you bet. I mean, we have emerged from a period of coasting in the vineyard and in the winery that was kind of our means of operation in the mid 90s, and we've had to sort of grab a hold of the back of our neck and lift ourselves up and say, you know, the bar is getting raised all around you, and you need to be part of that. And it's taken some real strength, some real self-criticism to understand the mistakes we were making in the vineyard and the things we needed to do to improve, and the same in the winery. It's taken some new employees who had the passion and the background and the knowledge to be able to get us there, and it's taken commitment by the owners to get us through a period where we were not going to be profitable in order to get where we needed to be.